And the next item of business is a statement by Graham Day on the strategy for our veterans, taking the strategy forward in Scotland. The Minister will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Graham Day for up to 10 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, thank you. I committed during my annual update to Parliament in December on the Scottish Government's support for veterans in the armed forces community that I would return to the Chamber to appraise members of the Government's response to the Veterans Strategy consultation. I am delighted to announce today that we have published the strategy for our veterans, taking the strategy forward in Scotland, which sets out how the Scottish Government and our partners will deliver across all of the strategy's key themes and cross-cutting factors in this country. It builds upon the work the Scottish Government is already undertaking to support our veterans and armed forces community, as set out in the document Our Commitments, published in 2012, renewing our commitments, published in 2016, and our annual updates to this Parliament, the most recent of which was only last month. The strategy recognised the importance of supporting our armed forces veterans and their families, and sought to build on the work by organisations across the public, private and charitable sectors to support and empower veterans by setting clear goals for the period through to 2028 and beyond to support our current and future veterans. The aim is to ensure that every veteran feels even more valued, supported and empowered, and never faces disadvantage as a result of their service. Presiding Officer, it also represents a rare occurrence where the governments of the United Kingdom have worked closely together to develop and jointly own a strategy, which I think demonstrates how much we value our shared commitment to supporting the veterans community now and in the future. After the strategy was published, each government conducted its own consultation to ensure the views of veterans, their families and those who support them across the UK were heard, and to explore how the strategy might be implemented in response to the specific needs of the veterans' populations and the distinct mechanisms for delivery in each nation. Our consultation highlighted the cross-UK approach to the strategy, which created the strong joint foundation for achieving its outcomes, and there was consistent feedback from stakeholders praising this collaborative approach between the governments. I am committed to continuing this intergovernmental approach, so welcomed by the sector, where appropriate and possible. This was, I hope, demonstrated by my decision to delay publishing our response to the strategy from early December to the new year, following an ask from the UK Government as a result of restrictions created by the general election. That was in an attempt to align the timing of our response with that of other governments across the UK. The UK and Welsh governments will also publish their responses this week. The document published today is the culmination of the work that the Scottish Government has been undertaking since the strategy was launched in November 2018, which included consulting extensively across the country on how to take its aims forward. I was clear from the beginning that our response needed to be driven and informed by those with the lived experience of the armed forces in Scotland, most importantly veterans themselves and the organisations who support them. But more than that, I also wanted to ensure that we examined and addressed the needs of the wider armed forces community in Scotland, including the families who play a vital role in supporting veterans during and after service, and whose lives are often impacted as a result of the demands of service on family life, including mobility and separation. The Scottish Government has a close working relationship with stakeholders across the veterans and armed forces community, and so in addition to the UK public consultation, we conducted a series of face-to-face engagements with veteran stakeholders in Scotland across the public, private and third sector, including groups of veterans themselves. Those engagements ran until April 2019 and involved over 60 organisations and groups from the length and breadth of Scotland, including charities, large and small, local authorities, Health Board, Armed Forces and Veterans Champions, and organisations involved with housing, skills and employability, as well as, I mentioned earlier, those groups of veterans. This covered more than 450 individuals and supplemented the approximately 10% of respondents from Scotland from the over 2,000 responses to the UK Government's public consultation. Working with the MOD, we participated in several of the resettlement workshops across Scotland, run on its behalf by the Career Transition Partnership, to directly canvass views of service leavers going through the transition process, which provided a valuable insight on their experience. Again, I think demonstrating the cross-government ownership and approach. I'm very grateful to all those who've contributed their views to the consultation process. These were invaluable as we developed our response. Our engagements recognised that some of the detailed questions in the public consultation had already been addressed by the Scottish veterans Commissioner and his reports. That and the overall positive picture in Scotland shown by the feedback again reinforces the benefits of the Scottish Government's decision to establish a Veterans Commissioner here in 2014, still the only such appointment in the UK. The inaugural Commissioner's reports and recommendations on the transition process, housing, employability, education and skills, and health and well-being, and the current Commissioner's independent assessment of our progress across all of these areas and his recent paper on transition have helped focus our activity over the last 6 years, ensuring our policies have been developed with the views of the wider veterans sector represented. And of course, this will continue to influence our thinking. I was pleased to be able to participate personally in many of the consultation events we conducted across Scotland, ranging from small gatherings of veterans to larger scale meetings and conferences with organisations including veterans charities and local authorities. My direct engagement included a visit to HMP Glenorchy, where I heard directly from a group of veterans who'd sadly fallen foul of the law. Throughout my time in post, I've welcomed the honest and constructive nature of the opinions that have been represented to me, which were again apparent at the consultation events that I attended. I continue to be impressed by the passionate and enthusiastic way views are presented, and most importantly, with the needs of veterans and their families always at the heart of this. I never fail to be humbled by the tireless dedication of so many people in Scotland's veterans charities and organisations who continually look to improve the lives of veterans. The comprehensive consultation process and the feedback it has amassed in Scotland, combined with that which was collected by the UK Government during the wider public consultation, gives me a degree of confidence that we now have a clearer picture than we've ever had before about the needs of the veterans community. As I've already noted, overall, the feedback about support for veterans in Scotland was positive. I've said many times before, and this process has reinforced my view that veterans are an asset to our society. The vast majority thrive and make a significant contribution to the success of our country, from the knowledge and skills that they offer employers and businesses through to the positive impact that they and their families have on local communities. Whilst no significant gaps were identified, there were a number of areas where potential improvements were suggested. Our strategy response published today summarises these and sets out what the Scottish Government and its partners are doing to address them, set against the cross-cutting factors of collaboration, coordination, data perception and recognition, and the key themes of community and relationships, employment, education and skills, finance and debt, health and well-being. And in addition to this, making a home in a civilian society, and of course, veterans and the law. Specific issues highlighted including the transition process, improving data, better understanding of the principles of the Armed Forces Covenant, and support for families. As I said, the strategy sets out its aims and objectives over an extended period, and our response in the same way. And that's a long-term piece of work. While we have identified some areas where rapid progress can be made, there is clearly a need for continued engagement with the sector and our partners going forward over the period that the strategy for our veterans spans, and indeed beyond. Therefore, we will report progress against strategy through the existing annual update to this Parliament. Presiding Officer, going forward, the Scottish Government will continue to give the utmost importance to improving the support for our veterans community. We owe our veterans and their families nothing less. And as Veterans Minister, I and this Government will do all that we can to ensure that they receive the recognition, support and care that they deserve. Presiding Officer, I am now happy to take questions from members.
Thank you. And the Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I'll allow around 20 minutes for that. Would those members who wish to ask a question please press the request to speak buttons. And I first of all call Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement today and join him in celebrating what our veterans have to offer and exploring how they can best be supported here in Scotland, including, importantly, their families. All MSPs will be grateful that the Scottish Government has taken a consensual approach to the issue of veterans' affairs and has coordinated its response with those of the United Kingdom and Welsh Governments. Can the Minister commit that this consensual attitude will guide the implementation of the response's recommendations and any further steps in veterans' affairs? And does the Scottish Government intend to respond to the UK and Welsh Government's responses to the strategy?
Graham Day.
I think, as Maurice Corrie has acknowledged, I do try to take a consensual approach. And I would commend him also for the approach he takes to this very important issue. In short, the answer is, insofar as that's possible, yes, we will. We are all trying to identify further what the role of the new Veterans Affairs Department that the UK Government has set up, how that will work in practice and how that will interact with the devolved governments. I'm pleased to say that I'm meeting UK MOD Minister Johnny Mercer in London next week, and that is one of the subjects we'll discuss, how we can work effectively together to improve the lives of veterans, because we have to be alive to the fact that very often those veterans who choose to live in Scotland, to settle in Scotland with their families, actually weren't based here when they made that decision. So that interaction between the various governments is incredibly important if we are to get that initial phase of resettlement and transition right.
Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome today's statement. I would also like to thank the Minister for early sight of it. I'm delighted that, first and foremost, the strategy recognises that veterans are an asset to Scottish society. In February last year, the Government issued advice for social landlords on giving priority in allocations for service leavers to ensure that ex-service personnel are not disadvantaged when applying for social housing. As part of this strategy, can the Minister say how many local authorities and social landlords have amended their allocation policy to reflect that guidance?
Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, let me thank Mark Griffin again for his constructive tone and agree with him about this issue about veterans overwhelmingly being an asset to a community. The exact point he asks about how many, I don't have to hand, but I'll undertake to write back to him, because this is an important issue that he touches upon. You know, the guidance was issued to RSLs and to local authorities. It included some best practice examples to encourage the following of those. I think, if I recall rightly, there was a good practice example from South Lanarkshire Council for supporting people who were leaving the armed forces. They have a particularly good example of how this should be done. But I think, following on from his initial question, I think it does give rise to the thought that perhaps we need to have another look at this in the context of the changing dynamics of those who are leaving the services. The idea that it is always families, it is always someone who served for 20 years, is not the reality. There are many single early service leavers who are now leaving the forces, an increasing number. And it strikes me that we might want to reflect on this with housing colleagues to make sure that we're assisting them as a group.
Move to open questions. I have Angela Constance, followed by Tom Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister will remember well his visit to the Scottish War Blinded Centre in my constituency, not least because I beat him at the shooting competition. But more importantly, where the Minister saw a wide range of activities that reduce loneliness and isolation that too many veterans experience. So therefore, would Mr Day agree that, as well as ensuring effective access to mental health services, that the strategy should also support community groups which bring veterans together and help prevent the poor health often associated with loneliness and isolation?
Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, can I thank the member for reminding me of the gubbing she gave me at the shooting competition. It was very kind of her. But she makes a very good point. Veterans groups at all levels play an important role in addressing the needs of our veterans. It's often through interacting with those smaller community groups that individuals will begin, perhaps for the first time, to acknowledge health issues that they have. Now, social isolation in particular is an increasingly identified problem across society in general, with veterans recognised as a significant cohort within that. We've recognised by the formulation of the social isolation strategy, and within that we will work with partners such as Legion Scotland, who already do fine work in this area. And a particular example of that would be a work stream that's being developed to provide formalised training on befriending and mental health first aid to the very individuals who perhaps deliver breakfast club activities across our community. So I absolutely recognise the important role of these groups.
Tom Mason, followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for his statement and for the constructive tone and tenure in which the Scottish Government has approached this issue. Regarding data collection, the report states that if veterans' questions are included in the 2021 census, as I hope they are, Analysing this data may take some time. Can the Minister provide any estimation of when this data will be available to use? And secondly, we all recognise the good that Veterans First Point network has done over the years. However, despite relying on 2.4 million of Scottish Government funding since 2017, the report only states that funding discussions are ongoing. Can the Minister set out how far these discussions have gone and if he expects to be able to continue funding this service in the years ahead?
Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, with regard to the question about the census, and I don't mean to deflect this in any way, that's a matter for the Parliament. The Government will bring this to this Parliament. I'm pretty confident that there will be support for that. But he does make an important point there. Gathering data through the census will be significant, it will be important, but it will take time. And then analysing that will take time also. So there's that kind of long-term piece of work. But we are looking at improving data collection in a variety of other ways, cross-referencing different data sets to try and improve our understanding, because if we're being honest about it, we have a rough idea of the number of veterans that we have in Scotland, but it's still a rough idea because many don't identify, whether it's through taking up employment or registering for health service. They choose not to identify about their service background. And we need to do a piece of work to encourage them to feel more enabled to give us that information so that we can provide the support that they require. With regard to the question about V1P, I recognise the importance of that model. And it is a live piece of work that the Government is undertaking, recognising that the funding does only run until the middle of this year.
Maureen Watt, followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Sadly, it's all too often the case that many veterans suffer from a number of mental health issues as a result of the trauma they have experienced, and many do not access the support they deserve. Therefore, can I welcome the progress being made in taking forward the Scottish Veterans Commissioner's recommendation to produce a mental health action plan for veterans' healthcare. Can the Minister update us on what further progress has been made with regard to this action plan and indicate when it may be implemented?
Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, the CARE network that we announced last month is being charged with the development of a Veterans Mental Health Action Plan, which will complement the 10-year mental health strategy, and the network will begin its work in a little over 2 months' time. However, beneath that work stream and beneath overarching strategies, there are small but significant measures that we can implement. And that's been brought home to me on my travels around various health services in Scotland. So, by way of example, establishing pathways into NHS mental health services for respected and highly regarded veterans charity who would be able to refer individuals that they encounter. Because as many of us know, very often the troubled veterans don't have GPs. So relying on traditional referral pathways doesn't work for them. So as I say, we have this work stream through the CARE network underway. That will be taken forward as a matter of priority. But beneath that, there are other measures that are being undertaken, and I'm happy to write to the member to outline to her how we are on the case with this.
Neil Bibby, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to attend the launch of Defence Transition Services in Erskine. Last week there I had first-hand the experience of service leavers transitioning to civilian life can vary from one local authority to the next, even though the Armed Forces Covenant has been widely adopted across Scotland, a point made by the Minister himself. In addition to working with local authorities, will he also engage with this new service to develop a more consistent approach and ensure that no service leaver anywhere is disadvantaged by the time they give to our armed forces?
Graham Day.
I don't think there's anything that came out of the strategy consultation that was more to the fore than the transition experience. The new transition service that the UK Government has launched is one that we will work closely with, because there is a need here to get this right. If we're being honest, right now we aren't getting transition collectively the way that it should be. So yes, happy to commit to that on behalf of the Government. With regard to local authority variations, and Neil Bibby makes a very good point, there are variations in the levels of support that are there. But again, that's something we're working on. There are some terrific examples out there of local authority champions across all parties who are setting an example of how we can get it right in each council area. So you may be aware that the government has brought local authority champions together last year to look at how we got greater consistency of approach. They had a number of asks, some quite reasonable asks around job description, training, that kind of thing, which we've committed to working with them on. We will reconvene early in the new year, again to look at how we support local authority champions and to improve the services that are being offered at councils at all levels, because they are key delivery partners for this government and the whole partnership approach if we're going to get this right for veterans.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Mike Rumbles.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the important issue of employment, the Minister will be well aware that veterans are a significant asset to Scottish businesses. Can he outline, therefore, what is being done to encourage veterans to take up funding and access courses to develop their skills, and also what support is available to business seeking to recruit veterans?
Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, again, another important aspect to the strategy. The idea that a veteran leaves, a service leaver leaves and immediately goes into employment may not be the right one for individuals. So ensuring that learners have clear sight of the opportunities that exist through further or higher education is really important. We're working collaboratively with colleges and universities on that. We're making some progress on it. We also, I think, training opportunities is something that we have been developing. So, for example, for all veterans in all situations, so we've provided, for example, £800,000 in 2019-20 to the Workplace Equality Fund. The purpose of that fund is to work with employers to address long-standing barriers for particular groups. And that includes spouses. And Scotland's bravest manufacturing company, an organisation I would recommend people to visit, have successfully secured funding to work with Balfour Beatty, Bayer Scotland and other leading SMEs to help them to create best practice within their organisations. On the point of business, I think Annabel Ewing asked what the Scottish Government was doing. Actually, we need to tap into what business is doing, if I'm being honest, because there are some fantastic employers in Scotland, large, medium and small, who proactively recruit from this cohort. And we're working with them to encourage them to evangelise on this subject, to reach out to employers who don't currently do that, and to explain to them what the benefits are of recruiting from the veterans community. So I'm quite encouraged by the work that's going on with business, both directed by ourselves and by them, and I'd be optimistic about the future in that regard.
Mike Rumbles, followed by Emma Harper.
On page 31 of the document kindly provided in advance, so I thank him for that, it says, with 6 local health boards, the Scottish Government has provided joint funding for the Veterans First Point Network. Now, the Minister knows that this is an issue I've been pursuing for some time, that all our health boards should be providing a first point of contact service. So it would be immensely helpful if he could say when he believes we're likely to achieve an effective first point of contact service for all our veterans, whichever health board area they live in.
Graham Day.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and again, let me acknowledge the work that the championing of this cause that Mike Rumbles has done. The Scottish Government has been working through an assessment of existing V1P services and exploring how services have been and are being delivered in those health board areas that don't have V1P or no longer have V1P, because as he knows, there are areas where it existed before and it was then lost. As he also knows, I've been visiting many health boards directly to look at the situation with regard to service delivery, and I have to say the Health Secretary has been incredibly supportive of that approach. Clearly, as we've heard, existing funding continues until, I think it's the middle of this year. So this is a matter of urgency, and I can tell him that the Minister for Mental Health and I are looking actively at that. In fact, we'll be meeting later this week to look at progress on it. He's right, there is no doubt that that V1P approach is one that veterans have faith in, and through the establishment of the care network, the aim here is to get to the point where there is a consistency of service and service type available to veterans the length and breadth of Scotland. It won't happen overnight, I'm not going to pretend it will, but that's the commitment we've made to deliver that kind of service.
Emma Harper, followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you. Last year, the Minister visited Dumfries to meet with constituents, including Robin Hood, a veteran who runs a charity called South West R&R, which helps former servicemen and women gain skills for employment, such as helping veterans obtain their HGV licence. And Robin has recently commenced work with D&G Council and local NFU Scotland representatives to help veterans access jobs in agriculture. I'd like to thank the Minister for the visit, and would the Minister join me in congratulating Robin on his work, and can he outline how the Veteran Strategy will be able to support organisations such as South West R&R in the future?
Graham Day.
I do indeed congratulate Robin Hood and the work that he and his colleagues are undertaking. I very much enjoyed my visit to Dumfries and Galloway at Emma Harper's invitation, not least of all because it introduced me to Councillor Archie Dryber, the local authority veterans champion, who is something of a force of nature and one of the very best examples of someone acting in that regard. As regards how the strategy supports organisations such as the one that she's referring to, one of the aims of the strategy is to bring a greater coherence to the employment opportunities and pathways into employment that we have, whether that's in training, education or an immediate route into employment. And the Veterans Employability Strategic Group is leading on that. Further examples of the kind of thing that's happening in terms of mainstream employability, there are funding initiatives such as Fair Start Scotland, and also specific work like the SCQF's partnership project to map and translate military qualifications against those recognised by employers. And that's a fantastic piece of work, one that is really bringing life-changing life changes here for those who are participating, because there is a real problem in translating military, particularly infantry skills, into civilian qualifications, both for the benefit of the employee but also the employer. So there's a number of work streams there, and I think it's important that we build upon those because, again, as I've said earlier, transition, employability are incredibly important.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The statement identifies some areas of rapid progress that can be made, but clearly the need for continued engagement with sector and partners. A progress report against the strategy is welcome, but can I ask the Minister to clarify the actions that will be taken to ensure continued engagement is achieved for the veterans and their families?
Graham Day.
I would refer Alexander Stewart to the foreword provided by Chris Hughes of Veterans Scotland, where Chris says it's encouraging to see such a comprehensive list of measures planned in response to the strategy. So it's not just a kind of reflection on where we are. There are a series of measures identified, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and I absolutely give them the guarantee that that continuing engagement directly with veterans themselves, because there's a change in demographic here. We know that. Needs will be different in different parts of the country, and also with the organisations, and I appreciate them giving me the opportunity to make this point, which I didn't in my statement. We are absolutely reliant in Scotland on partnership working, and the charitable sector in this country deserves enormous credit for the way it goes about its task in supporting our veterans, and I'm happy to place that on the record today.
That concludes questions on the Minister's statement on the strategy for veterans. Apologies to Ruth Maguire for being unable to call her. And we shall move on to the next item of business.